Good evening, everyone. I am so thrilled to see this many people here. It's unbelievable to me when I think that I started down this pathway 8 years ago professionally and 11 years ago personally, that first of all, that we would see a facility like this at this point. Beautiful, beautiful, incredible facility. How many of you have been here before tonight? I'm curious. So quite a few. Awesome. It's just, for those of you who haven't, come back when everybody's here during the day. There's just so much going on here, so much potential and so much space. And a lot of enabling of community, which I think those of us who have kids on the spectrum, we're really aware often that we need a lot more community with one another. So this place certainly provides that. Just wanted to say a few things at the beginning to thank the Pacific Autism Family Network for supporting this evening, and all of the support staff that have stuck around this evening to allow this to take place tonight. I also want to mention that we're going to be doing a question and answer period at the end. If you have any questions during the presentation that are points of clarification, you didn't hear something I said, or you just want to clarify, please feel free to stick up your hand or just speak out, and we can certainly cover that. But knowing what we need to go through tonight, and I know everybody's on an agenda, we'll try to hold most questions until the end, and we will have a microphone that will be traveling around the room. So we'll try to do that from 7:45 to 8 at the end tonight. Okay, so we're going to start off tonight by going through a little bit of science. And this is not really my background either, for any of you who are thinking, oh gosh, going back to biology class. But it's really important for the kind of meat and potatoes, forgive the pun, that you've come here tonight for, to take back to either your own child at home or clients, patients that you work with. It's really important for us to understand the why behind it first, because I could stand up here and say, these are things I know to be generally supportive for all of these kids, but it's not going to stick unless you know the why, and it's not going to develop unless you know the why. So hopefully, we'll take you through it at an understandable level for anyone. But again, if anybody needs clarity, let me know. Okay. Another question that I've been asked previously is, does this apply to people beyond kid age? And the answer is absolutely. And the other thing that I will say, being a mother of a child on the spectrum, is that all of this applies to me too. It applies to not just mothers of kids on the spectrum, it applies to all of us, and I think you'll see that as we go through the information tonight. So those of you who work with older people on the spectrum or have an older child at home on the spectrum know that absolutely, some of the outcomes may be a little different down the line, but there's always benefit in pursuing what we're going to be discussing here tonight. Okay, good. So I've been working with clients with autism for the past 8 years in my own practice called Whole Family Nutrition. And I am going to be joining the clinic here at PAFN as well. You met my son, Liam. I'm also something called a certified GAPS practitioner, and we'll talk a little bit later about what GAPS is. But as you can see from the name, gut and psychology syndrome, it's tying the brain and the gut together. I'm an instructor at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, where I teach allergies and optimum nutrition for the mind and the aging course there. I'm also a consultant for a new center called the Watson Center for Brain Health, which is out at the Fortia Sports Center in Burnaby, for any of you that know that. So I'm working there with clients with traumatic brain injury. And then I'm thrilled to be joining the PAFN clinics, and my first day is Friday. So any of you that want to reach me, you can certainly reach me there. Why am I here tonight? The same reason all of you are here. This is a picture of Liam when he was 2 years old. This was right around his second birthday. You know, he's got clothes on, so you can't quite see just how skinny he was. He was particularly sick at this time. He hadn't eaten much for about 3 days. You know, very in his own world at this point. And we sort of discovered dietary interventions by accident initially. This was, you know, now 11 years ago. And so I went to the library instead of going on the internet at that point and took out every book that I could find about autism. And, you know, I was working full time at the time, so I just kind of flipped through to see which one really struck me first, and came upon one where the mother in this book, and her name is Karen Sarusi, had done some dietary interventions for her child. And at that point, you know, it was still early days. I don't think we were even on the list yet for an assessment. But I said to my husband, you know, how about we just try this? We've got nothing to lose. You know, we'll just wake up tomorrow morning and we won't give him any milk. And at this point, my son was completely addicted to milk. He was drinking milk over eating. You know, everything was just milk, milk, milk. So we got up the next morning, tried to explain it to him. We took the milk out, and surprisingly, he did not complain. And by 8 o'clock that night, we'd gone from the previous day having a child whose face you had to hold to get him to answer a question. And often you had to repeat the question 4 or 5 times, and I'm sure there's people in this room who know this very well. And, you know, who was very much off in his own space. And by 8 o'clock on this first night, he was initiating peekaboo games with some friends that we had over for dinner. He was here. He was present. And so this came to us because we saw it happen right in front of us. And I then, you know, spent the subsequent 11 years figuring out why, and, you know, not looking at people's work, looking at some really interesting research around this, trying to make sense of it, working with, you know, client family after client family after client family, and seeing, you know, how everyone is totally individual, but that there's a lot of common themes that run through this. We then went on to do further dietary interventions for my son and ended up with the GAPS protocol, which we will cover tonight. And that for us was where we really saw those remaining, I like to sort of, the best way I can describe them is cognitive black holes. You know, things like you could learn the day of those days of the week, you know, 8 times a day, and it still wouldn't be there the next day when you got up. There was no connection for it. And it was once we started the GAPS protocol that we started to see those black holes fill in and, you know, and dissipate over time. So it's been a long road, for sure, but incredible advances and rewards. So who can benefit from these type of dietary interventions we're going to be discussing tonight? So anybody with any type of bowel movement issue, too much, too little, too mushy, too hard, any of those nice ones. Energy issue. So one of the things we know is mitochondria, which are little organelles in every single one of our cells. They are the energy producing factories in the cells. And we see a lot of mitochondrial problems, challenge, damage for kids on the spectrum. So those play out visibly with their level of energy. Muscle tone issues, picky eating. I'm sure there's no one here who's had to contend with that. Limited eating. I'll only eat carrots. That's the only vegetable I'll eat, right? Reflux is something that I encounter a lot with my clients. Food allergies, eczema, psoriasis, rashes, those kinds of things, hives, respiratory issues, any type of environmental allergies as well as food allergies. Seizures and tics, and we'll be talking about a particular protocol tonight that is very, very beneficial for those. Anxiety, right? We know that's pretty much 100% of our kids. There's some degree of anxiety there. And then obsessive compulsive tendencies, which sometimes can be there from an early age, but, you know, as we found with our son, when kids start to go through puberty, that's often when you see this whole new appearance of OCD tendencies. Any type of sensory issues, meltdowns, sleep issues, anything I haven't covered? So hopefully all of you feel like there's some attachment to something on this list now, yeah? Okay. So basically everyone, right? What is it that ties all of this together? Any idea? Think? We have 380,000 billion bacteria with us, wherever we go. This is per person. This is how many bacterial cells we're carrying with us right now, on average, give or take a few, depending on the person. That's a lot of bacteria, right? So this is what's actually tying everything together. And some of you who are thinking, oh my God, she's completely off her rocker, hold on, we'll get there. We'll get there. We can see now this isn't such a crazy idea as it was maybe 10 years ago even. We're seeing a lot of the new research, not only on autism, but all kinds of chronic issues, and even things like, asthma, studies on asthma coming out, where they're looking at the human microbial connections to these issues. So we're seeing magazines like Scientific American feature on their cover your inner ecosystem, and you might not be able to see it down there, but their subtitle was "Who's in Control?" there. And that could probably be the subtitle of this talk, actually. So I found a really fun animated video about the microbiome on YouTube. It's about 7 minutes long. I feel like it's the perfect introduction at this point. So,
microbes are everywhere. On your phone, in your water bottle, on your hands before you wash them, on your hands after you wash them, and literally everywhere else on top of you too. Microbes are omnipresent at any moment, and there is nothing we can do about it. So millions of years ago, we made a pact. We give them shelter and food, and in turn, they work for us. But the more we learn about this partnership, the more it looks like a Cold War. Inside our mother's womb, humans start out sterile. When we're born and traveling through the birth canal, billions of our mother's bacteria cover every single part of our bodies. This is an essential part of human health. Children born via C-section have a higher rate of asthma, immune diseases, and even leukemia. So our bodies do not only accept the invasion of microorganisms, they welcome it. Over millions of years, we co-evolved to make the best of our relationship. Mother's milk, for example, contains special sugars that are meant to feed and support certain groups of microbes, work as a decoy for others, and help to modulate the immune system. It takes up to 2 years until a healthy microbe community has formed. Every human has their own unique microbiome made up of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other organisms. We have 3 categories of guests on and in our bodies. 1, quiet passengers that do their own thing and are politely ignored. By being there, they take up space and keep more aggressive intruders in check. 2, guests that harm us but with whom we've learned to live. For example, bacteria that literally create acid that melts our teeth if we don't brush enough. They want to take up as much space as they can, and we don't want them to. But we can't get rid of them entirely. 3, friendly fellows that our bodies want to have around. Most of them are a community of 380,000 billion bacteria from up to 5,000 different species that live in our gut. These gut microorganisms help us digest food and pull additional calories from things we can't digest ourselves. Unfortunately, our gut is also the perfect point of attack for intruders, so it's guarded by an aggressive army, our immune system. To survive here, our microbiome co-evolved with us to be able to communicate with our body. The most important part of that is to ask the immune system to not kill them. But they also have a real motivation to keep our gut healthy, so some of them produce messenger substances that help to educate the immune system, and others stimulate the gut cells to regenerate faster. But over the last few years, evidence has emerged that the influence of our gut microbiome goes much, much further. It might even talk directly to our brain. We've observed a few curious things. 90% of our body's serotonin, an important messenger substance for nerve cells, is produced in the gut. Some scientists think the microbiome does this to communicate with the vagus nerve, the information highway of our nervous system. Other examples are bacteria that stimulate immune cells in the gut, so they send a kind of alarm signal to the brain. Here it activates immune cells that help the brain recover from injuries. Since the brain decides when we eat, the microbiome is interested in a healthy brain. A new field of science is opening up here, and we're just on the verge of understanding how these complex systems inside our bodies interact. But we are starting to see how much our microbiome actually influences us and our behavior. Take depression, for example. Healthy rats fed microbes from the guts of depressed people began showing anxiety-like behavior and symptoms that look like depression. And in early 2017, a study linked the microbiome to intelligence by connecting a certain setup of bacteria in newborns with better motor and language skills. But it might also influence our daily lives. Tests with fruit flies showed that their microbiome influenced what kinds of food they craved. This could mean your microbes are able to tell your brain which food it should get them, although this is not a one-way street. The seed for our microbiome comes from our mother, but how it develops and changes is determined by what we eat. The organisms in our gut feed on different things. Some like fibers and leafy greens, others go for sugars and starches, and some love greasy fries and butter. Our gut is like a garden in which we constantly decide what will grow and blossom. If we eat healthily, we breed bacteria that like healthy food. If we eat a lot of fast food, then we breed fast food-loving bacteria. Life is hard, so we can get trapped in a vicious circle. You have a stressful time and eat lots of burgers and fries and pizza. This is awesome for fast food bacteria. They multiply and take up space from vegetable-loving bacteria. But even worse, they send signals to the brain to continue what it's doing. This makes you want more fast food, which breeds more fast food bacteria, which makes you crave fast food, and so on. This kind of self-reinforcing cycle could play a huge role in obesity. But it's important to stress that you can fight this process and reverse it by eating healthily and breeding more good bacteria. Beyond weight gain, our microbiome has also been linked to other serious diseases like autism, schizophrenia, and cancer. One of the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's is actually gut problems. If your body is overrun with bacteria that harm you, there is often only one solution. You bring in an army of good guys. That's very easy. You just transplant some healthy poop. You do that by literally transferring poop from a healthy person into your gut. This method is already used to cure diarrhea that's caused when C. difficile bacteria take over a gut microbiome. But we just don't know enough about the complex interplay at work here yet. For example, a transplant from an overweight donor cured a woman's diarrhea, but contributed to her obesity down the line. This caused some waves, and another study tried to reverse the effect. Poop transplants from slim people to obese ones gave them a more diverse microbiome and made them less sensitive to insulin, both things that also happen when people lose weight. We need to do a lot more science to really understand how our microbes make us healthy or sick. But whether we like it or not, we need our microbiome and it needs us. We'll never have our bodies to ourselves, but we have gained a powerful ally, if we can just keep the peace.
Interesting. I'm curious, for how many of you was there a lot of new information in there? Most of you have, yeah, a few people. But have most of you at least been hearing more waves about the microbiome lately? Yeah. Pretty cool stuff. So, we could look at it from a negative aspect and say who's in control. But what I'm going to invite you to do tonight is look at it from the other side. Wow, if we have access to 380,000 billion bacteria that we can actually affect through what we're eating and some other lifestyle factors, that puts a big army on our side as well. Okay. So within that animation, there was reference to many, many, many things. So know for those of you where a lot of that was new information, we will sort of be connecting these things again. If any of you want the link to that YouTube video, I know there's a lot of letters and numbers after it, just email me. Lynn's got cards out at the table, and I'll be happy to send that link along, because it's a great one to show to kids as well, or therapists or grandparents who don't know why you're wanting to give your kids probiotic food after this talk. So I'm happy to pass that along. So we saw obviously intimate connections to the digestive system within that. We can see how the microbes that we have in our gut are connected, but also huge partners with our immune system and how our immune system is choosing to respond. So if we're looking at a child who's got a lot of allergies, who's constantly breaking out in rashes, for example, or has asthma as part of an allergic reaction as well, we know that we can work on the immune system through the gut bacteria as well. We have some harmful bugs around for sure. They're not all good guys, but it's our good guys that keep the bad guys in check. And we'll be talking a little further. They didn't talk too much in that animation about genetics, but we're going to be talking a little more about our own genetics in relation to our gut bugs and also the genetics of the bugs themselves. There's a really interesting research going on now. They're also responsible for providing us with a big portion of our nutrients, either indirectly or directly. They're affected by our stress levels. So if we're stressed out, our bugs are stressed out, really, and they start to diminish in number, the good bugs. So how many of us do not have stressful days? Yes, no hands go up. There we go. So we're always on the lookout for how we can support our stress levels. And then the connection to the brain that they started looking at in that animation, and we'll look at that a lot further within tonight's talk. So let's first focus on the microbiome itself. So each one of us has somewhere around 3 pounds of bacteria. So, larger people will have more bacteria, smaller people will have slightly less, but that's a pretty, sizable percentage of our body. And as they said in the video, there's up to 5,000 different species. Someone may have very low diversity, so they don't have that many species. Some measurements have even been above 5,000 for some individuals where they've mapped their microbiome. Some of these names you'll be familiar with, like Lactobacillus acidophilus is a form of Lactobacillus bacteria, which you see in a lot of probiotics. Bifidobacterium is one of our other big families in our guts. Bacteroides is a lesser known family because we see these supplements that we can take, but the fact is that a lot of our gut microbes that serve us don't survive outside of the body. So that's why you don't see Bacteroides in a probiotic supplement, for example, but they're crucial to how our bugs are functioning. So another thing that we don't often think about is the fact that all of these microbes have byproducts. So just like we have our byproducts, right, that we visit the washroom to get rid of, these bugs have byproducts. And where do they end up? For the most part. In our body, yeah, certainly in our poop, eventually as well, and the bugs themselves too, but they get outputted into our body, right? Like that's the environment that they're in. So those are all chemical-based compounds. They're biochemical, but they're still chemical-based compounds, which means that they're potentially reactive compounds. And that's when we look at some of the more current research that's being done, is looking at what are some of these compounds doing and how are they affecting our mood and our brain and our neurological system in general. So as you might remember from the video, they talked about the fact that it's really all about real estate in the gut. So if you already have good bugs occupying all the chairs, there's not many chairs left for bad bugs. to come in and occupy. So that's really our goal, is to make sure that we have very large populations of good bugs in there, so that when we are exposed to bad bugs, which is inevitable, we can't walk around, and in fact we don't want to walk around disinfecting everything, because that's part of the issue that we're encountering now. We know we're going to encounter those guys, so we just need to have a robust army at our service to prevent them from taking hold. So the interesting thing is that even if we're exposed to, let's say, a bad strain of bacteria, if we don't have any real estate available on the wall of the gut and they can't adhere to the gut wall, they will not stick around. They won't be able to stick around and populate and cause a problem. You have to have empty space on the gut wall for them to, lock into, and then they can start reproducing. So that's why we want so much good bacteria in there. Diversity of species is the key, and one thing that a lot of studies have found is kids on the autism spectrum generally have much lower diversity of gut bugs. So we don't know exactly why this is yet, but we know it's an issue, so we can work on it, right? We know it is what it is. So there's lots of ways that we can increase diversity. So we'll be talking about that too. Got ahead of myself there. There's also lots of unfortunate ways that we can damage our microbiome, and a lot of them are things that we might be exposed to, or our kids might be exposed to every day. Antibiotics, obviously, top of the list. When we use an antibiotic, and there may be very good reasons for using it in a particular situation, you are wiping out the bulk of the good bacteria in the gut. And in most of the studies, what they've seen as a timeline on that is about 4 years later. People are still, for that first 4 years, you're still showing a lack of diversity after one round of antibiotics. So I know, maybe a lot of your kids, a lot of the kids that I've worked with sometimes have had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds in the space of a year or two. So their ability to come back and become diverse again as far as their microbiome is concerned is really, really impacted. Processed food. How many of us don't eat at least one item in a day that's been processed, packaged, refined, something in some way? And we know a lot of our kids tend toward those foods, right? And we'll talk about why tonight too. Chlorinated water. So our tap water here is pretty good, but it's still chlorinated. So anytime you're drinking a glass of water straight out of the tap, you will be getting some chlorine. And chlorine is what? Why is it in the water? Because it's antibacterial, right? So it's killing the bugs in the water, but it's also, unfortunately, having a minor effect. I'm not saying panic. Next time you're out at a restaurant, you think, oh my God, I can't drink that glass of water. Absolutely not. But if that's what you're drinking as your main water source every day, all day, you might want to think about changing it. Antacids, a big one. I have met kids and teenagers on the spectrum who have been put on antacids already. And, this is something for a later talk, but there's absolutely no need for antacids, especially in the kids, but also in the adult population. And they don't just kill off the good bugs, but they mess around with the bug composition and can cause problems. So our stomach should be highly acidic. We want it to be highly acidic. If there's an issue going on there, it's a bacterial issue, and that's what we need to address, not getting rid of our stomach acid, because that just makes further problems down the road. Chronic stress. Chronic stress will absolutely have a really strong impact on our microbiome. Constipation. If the food is sitting in the gut for a really long time, we're going to have different composition of bugs, and we're going to have a lot of pathogenic bugs hanging around there. Infections, that's an obvious one, and radiation. So if anybody's, the odd X-ray, no big deal. But if anybody's been through cancer radiation, for example, their microbiome will be really deeply impacted by that. So now let's move to the digestive system. We eat, right? We chew on the food. How many of you have kids that don't chew their food properly? Yeah. And I know for our son, he would chew something maybe 2-3 times and you would see the chunk going down his throat. So this is something that I find self-corrects when we start working on the bugs, on the diet, because that is a neurological issue. And it's actually, when we think of this who's controlling who here scenario, The bugs have more to eat. The bad bugs have more to eat if your food is less broken down. Let's put it that way. So there may be some very, sci-fi-esque loop going on there between the bugs and how these kids are eating. So then goes down our esophagus into our stomach, which is here. In our stomach, the food should get really, really highly acidified, and there's some protein breakdown that happens there. But there's no absorption, and there shouldn't really be bugs per se in the stomach. But often there are a lot of bugs in the stomach if stomach acid's been low for a long time. So that's also where we can see some issues. So kids who have reflux, kids who complain of stomach aches within, say, half an hour of eating their meal, or complain of like burning sensations, or go and put themselves over something to get some nice deep pressure on their bellies within half hour or so of eating. That's all stomach-based stuff that's going on, and that will be due to a bad kind of microbiome picture in the stomach. Then the food goes down, kind of slides in behind the large intestine, and spends a fairly short time actually in our small intestine, a few hours in the intestine, moving all the way through. That's where the bulk of the digestive action happens. So that's where the bulk of the digestive enzymes appear. We also have bile come in at that point to help us detoxify and break down our fats. And it's also where most of the initial bacterial action takes place. So we have something in there, these little hair-like structures called villi, and that's the bugs hang out around the villi, and they help us with food breakdown. They help us with absorption, and they also help protect the gut wall in that area. And then the food eventually makes its way up this way, up and across and down, and then we know what happens after that. When it's in the large intestine at the end, it sits in there for a very long period of time compared to the small intestine. So that's actually where we have the bulk of our bacteria, particularly in this very last section, the descending colon or descending bowel here. That's where the main action is bug-wise and bacterial-wise. So that's where we can kind of look at the composition of the microbiome and things like stool tests as well as what's going on in there. So if we think down the line then in terms of problems, we can have chewing issues. Sometimes we can even have swallowing issues. We can have stomach-related issues. We can have issues in the small intestine where the kids are producing almost no digestive enzymes and the food's coming out the other end looking much the same as it went in or not very well broken down. And then we can have a lot of pathogenic issues in the intestine and things like constipation as well. Okay. So we've already learned that microbiome assists with food breakdown. So it's a key partner. If we don't have our microbiome in place, we will not be digesting food very well. You don't have to put up hands, but this is a rhetorical question. How many of you have yourself or known somebody who's taken a round of antibiotics and ended up with diarrhea at the end of it, right? That's because our good gut bugs are getting killed off and we're not able to properly break down and assimilate, so our body's just getting rid of that food that's sitting in the gut. The gut flora has a unique ability to help us detoxify substances that we can't, our human cells can't detoxify. So a good example is something like, you eat some tuna fish, there's going to be a little bit of mercury in that tuna fish. If you have a good composition of gut bugs there, those bugs actually are able to detoxify that mercury and render it harmless to the body. Pretty amazing. But you have to have them there. You have to have sufficient numbers of them in order for them to do that. And these days, we know that we're exposed to so many new things that we really have no idea what the interaction is with the human body yet, unfortunately, but we're still exposed to them. So these guys can go a long way to helping us deal with some of those more difficult substances that are coming into our world these days. The bugs, the good bugs, their food of choice is dietary fiber. So primarily vegetable fiber. And so we'll look at some more what are called prebiotic foods later on. But that's why we need to get our kids eating so much more vegetable matter in particular. And that's not always easy, but there's a way to do it. Where there's a will, there's a way for sure. They also help to maintain what's referred to as gut wall integrity. Basically, Your gut wall is what separates you from the outside world when you think about it. I mean, it's internal to you, but it's like your skin. It's like an inner skin, right? If that's breached, just like if you have a big, cut on your arm, that wall is breached, right? We can get infection then, right? And we can also bleed. So things can come into the body and things can move out of the body. The same thing happens in the gut wall when it's not well protected by a population of bacteria. We can actually get things leaking both ways across the gut wall. And some of you may have heard the expression leaky gut before. That's what we're talking about. Not so much in the stomach. That's much more rare, but in the intestinal tract and particularly in the large intestine, we can see that as well. So if we don't have great composition there, the chances of us ending up with leaky gut type of symptoms are much higher, obviously. And this is one thing that's assumed. Now, this may seem like a little bit of a stretch at this point, but we'll fill in the gaps later. When we have a leaky gut, we can also assume we have a leaky blood-brain barrier because of what they know now about how inflammation transfers. But we'll talk about that more in detail. So let's look at the immune system. So something you may not know is that when we're first born, our microbes actually train our immune system. They're like the teachers of the immune system. So they tell the immune system what's good and what's bad, basically. They help to identify these are good bugs that should be part of the microbiome, and these are bugs that we should view as enemies and keep out of the body. And it continues to do this throughout life. So one of the problems or one of the hurdles that we might be dealing with some of these kids is that their immune system got trained a little unusually. And so pathogens that might not be a good idea for anybody to have in their gut might actually be registered with the immune system as a permanent part of the microbiome. So they kind of have a ticket to be present. So this is quite a long chunk of text here, but I'm just going to read it out so that we can break it down. Microbes have the ability to trigger inappropriate immune activation, especially macrophages, which are a type of white blood cell, which can travel from the gut and penetrate the blood-brain barrier and communicate inappropriately with neural cells, altering our behavior. So what they figured out is that there's also this immune system link, the gut bacteria immune system, where basically immune cells that think they're doing the right thing are moving up into the brain to deal with what they think is, an inflammatory episode up there, but they're sort of being given the wrong instructions or given faulty instructions for the health of the body as a whole. 80% of all of our immune system and our immune cells are in our gut. They're in that tube that we have inside of us. So if that tube is unhappy, if it's inflamed or if it's full of food that's not really doing our bodies so good, chances that our immune system are going to be robust to fight off that bug that might give us an ear infection or bladder infection, et cetera, are really, really low, right? So this is why we need to maintain the gut bugs for the immune system. And again, kind of like in this longer sentence up here, this sort of says it a little easily. So our gut bugs are either protective for us against inflammation, they can help stop and dampen inflammatory issues, or they can magnify the issues that are happening. So they're either working for us or against us, and we obviously want to get them working for us. Okay. So let's look at a few pathogens, okay? So this is a term for bugs that we might not really want in the body. So I'm sure you've all heard of Candida in one form or another. We see this in a lot of the kids. Parasites are actually much more common than you would think. They're not just for people who have gone and done exotic vacations or eaten something or drunk something they shouldn't have. I see them probably about 50% of the time in the kids that I work with. Really, really important to get those under control and identified. And then, of course, we have a laundry list of potential overgrown bacteria that can show up. So these byproducts can enter the bloodstream. So let's imagine we have this picture of inflammation right? And we have a leaky gut going on. So the byproducts that some of these characters are spitting out have really easy access into our bloodstream and potentially all the way up to the brain and possibly crossing the blood-brain barrier. So lots of direct routes to attack the nervous system as well. Now the other thing that their byproducts do is they act as antagonists to some of the other good bacteria that are down there. Now this is a two-way street, so our good bugs also emit byproducts that kill off bad bugs. So it's like poisons. You can think of they're toxins that are given out against other bugs, but equally our bad bugs that are in residence, if they're in strong enough numbers, are going to be spitting out things that are going to be killing off our good bugs, unfortunately, on a regular basis, which is why we want to stay on top of it. So inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. They can also be food stealers. So parasites are the most notorious for this, where they live off us. That's the definition of a parasite, right? They take from the host and they don't give back to the host. So they literally are taking the food for themselves and thriving and reproducing, right? So what I often see in tandem with parasitic infections is kids that are really underweight. And certainly our son had some issues with parasites back when he was about 5, and he gained 10 pounds in 1 month after we started the GAPS protocol and also started treating for parasites. So remember this idea of attachment. If we get enough good bugs in there, then the bad bugs can't come in and take over. So only about 2% of our genes in each of our bodies are human. What's the other 98%? Yeah. 98% of the genetic information in our body of the single genes are bacterial. So if we want to affect somebody genetically, we have, again, a real opportunity here, or we have a real problem as well, depending on what's going on for that individual. So just to give you a visual on this, it's our human genome. The red circle is our microbiome's genome in terms of quantity. We also have, so that's the genes. We also have more microbial cells than we have human cells. They used to think it was 10 to 1. We had 10 microbial cells for every 1 human cell. Now, very, very recently, they've adjusted that, and they're now saying it's sort of 1 to 1-ish. But nevertheless, that's still pretty interesting to think about. So I like to refer then to our bugs as our extended genome. They can, we can manipulate them. They can do things to help us or to hurt us. Some of the current research is looking at how these microbes might sort of affect the expression of our human genes. So if somebody has certain microbial populations present, that might actually trigger cancer, for example, or that might trigger the development of Parkinson's. Equally, if you have other bugs in residence, it may turn that genetic light switch off again for certain conditions. So this is what we're going to be seeing in the next kind of 5 to 10 years, huge research in this area. So it's coming up. So one way you can think of it, if all of this idea of genetics is brand new, is if you think of a sculptor, and the sculptor's got a big block of marble in front of them. That big block of marble is the genes. So that's the genetic makeup. That's the potential of what we have there. And then the sculptor, who's now going to act on that big chunk of marble, is the environment that those those genes are in, basically. So the sculptor can affect that marble block in the same way that through microbes, through what we're eating, through how much exercise we're getting, how much sleep we're getting, how much stress we're under, all of that, we can affect the expression of our genes as well. Microbes increase our ability to absorb nutrients from our food. So they bring our level of absorption way, way up. And probably a lot of you know that kids often have deficiencies who are on the autism spectrum. So it's really important that we want to optimize there. They also stimulate neurochemical production in the gut. So you may have seen in the video that somewhere between 80 to 90% of our serotonin, our happy neurotransmitter, is not produced in the brain. It's produced in the intestinal wall. And this is true of a lot of other neurotransmitters as well, that there is a deep contribution to the gut creation of some of these neurochemicals. They also facilitate digestion and absorption of all of our food groups, and they produce some of their own vitamins. So this is, again, when somebody's done repeated rounds of antibiotics, they'll be really deficient in a number of the B vitamins and in vitamin K, which is known as our blood clotting vitamin. So, produced throughout the intestine. Obviously then, these are all going to affect our brain in one way or another, because our brain uses nutrients like nothing else in the body, right? It's our most hungry organ that we have. So even if we just have one nutrient deficient, like let's pick zinc. Zinc is involved in hundreds of interactions in the body, hundreds of enzymes that we use to do everything from blinking our eyes to digesting our food to sleeping. So if even one of these is suboptimal, it will have knock-on effects in terms of behavior and other physical symptoms as well. So I've listed, probably for a lot of you, this is not news, these deficiencies that I've listed up here. These are the most common that I see in practice with the kids. And certainly we can do something about every single one of those. But the first thing we need to do is identify them. And, actually the first thing we need to do is work on the microbiome. And the second thing we need to do is identify the deficiencies and work to solving those. Okay, so some of us have, mildly stressful days. Some of us might have really stressful days with our kids. Fight or flight for all of us halts digestion. So if you almost get into a car accident or you see a car accident happen right beside you, what's the feeling that you get, right? You're processing the information and it goes straight to the gut, right? And if something really upsetting happens to you, you don't really feel like sitting down and eating a 3-course meal right afterwards. This is, it's biological necessity. If we're in a state of high stress, our body's thinking, we have to run away from the tiger, right? So we need to send our energy to our periphery. We need to send it to the muscles. We need to get out of here. It's not about that rest and digest. Oh, I'm going to, sit and have a nice meal. So many of our kids are spending, maybe even 100% of their time in fight or flight in the course of the day. So their digestion is really not working for them. Now, obviously, dealing with stress is a bigger issue than just nutrition, right? It's huge. And I'm sure a lot of you are working on strategies, but it's important for us to understand why digestion might be impacted in all of our kids just because of this one reason too. When our fight or flight response kicks in, our adrenal glands shoot out a hormone called cortisol, and that affects our blood sugar. So every time we get a little stressed out, our blood sugar spikes and our cortisol goes up. And if this is happening, say, 100 times in a day, we're going to burn out our adrenal glands, we're going to run out of cortisol, and we're going to end up with blood sugar irregularities. And I know that this can be a common feature for older kids on the spectrum, that blood sugar management starts to be a real issue. And I see it with younger kids, too. Talked before about this issue with bacterial diversity. So the more stress, the fewer families of bugs who are going to stick around and put up with that stress, right? And then the longer the stress goes on, the more constant it is. It uses up an amino acid called L-glutamine. And L-glutamine is a sort of unique amino acid in that it is the one most used by our gut wall to keep it all intact and to keep the leakiness at bay. And it's also the amino acid most used by the brain. So interesting connection there. But if we're stressed out all the time, we're actually depleting that one amino acid that's doing both of those really important jobs. So we used to think that it was a one-way street how our information traveled, right? We see something upsetting, or we see somebody we love and we get butterflies in our stomach, we respond this way. And what they've discovered now is that it's a two-way street. So there's this amazing thing called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is what they refer to in the video as being this information highway that travels between the gut and the brain. And it's not only the gut and the brain. I'll show you a picture in a minute of the full nerve. But this is a nerve that travels all the way up our trunk and connects into the brainstem. And this is what they've discovered is how our gut microbes are speaking to our brain and giving information to the brain. And it's also what is receiving information back down again. So we have a nervous system in our gut called the enteric nervous system. It's a sort of standalone system. It's often thought to be like our original nervous system, but this is also the information highway that that gut nervous system uses to connect into the brain as well. So here's the vagus nerve. You can see here this yellow, so it connects up into the brain all the way down. It actually stops off at the heart and at the lungs. So this is why, you know what you feel like when you're in a state of panic, right? All those organs are involved and goes all the way down, connects into the stomach too, the small intestine and the large intestine. There's no area in the digestive tract that it doesn't connect into, which is pretty interesting. And so they haven't quite figured out all the mechanisms involved. This is like really, really recent research, but they're starting to put a lot of information together about this to figure out how what's going on down here doesn't stay down here. It goes all the way up to there, and we have a response there. So the serotonin is made, and some of the other neurochemicals are made with assistance from the microbes. Without the microbes, they're not made. So often, if you just focus on improving the microbial picture in the gut, suddenly antidepressants are not needed anymore. That serotonin, the issue wasn't in the brain. The issue was actually in the gut, you know, in certain cases anyway. Okay, so we've been all around here. Hopefully you can see now how these all connect in together. Yeah? Anything really unclear or that you want me to review at this point before we move forward? No? Good. Okay. So, knowing all of this now, we have a choice to make. So we can support and employ our gut microbes and our digestive tract to be a source of necessary nutrients and processes for ultimate brain health, if that's what our goal is, right? That's one choice we can make. Or our gut microbes and poorly functioning digestive tract can be a source of toxic microbial byproducts, immune stress, and inflammatory chemicals that ultimately will affect the brain in a negative way. Is that clear for everyone? Anybody want to argue with me? Sure? Okay. So, we're going to look at just a couple, we could look at hundreds of studies now, and they're coming out day by day by day. It's a super exciting time to be looking at this stuff. But I just want to introduce you to this one in particular, because this is a researcher who is going to be affiliated with the Pacific Autism Family Network, and this is the very exciting research direction that they're going into clinically here at the center. So I'm like over the moon about this. But basically this idea that what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut, and figuring out the mechanisms of what is going on there and what specifically is happening microbially with these kids. So Dr. did any of you watch the Autism Enigma on Nature of Things a few years ago? It was on. I'm seeing a few nodding heads. If you haven't seen that, go on a CBC website to the Nature of Things show, and I think you can still download the whole, I think you can still download the whole episode. Really, really interesting to watch. And it sort of dips its toe in the water of all of this, because of course it's looking at, autism treatment in totality. But Dr. Derek McFabe was first. That's how he came to my attention first, was on that documentary. And then lo and behold, I discovered he's connected to a number of the researchers that I'm now involved with at the center here too. So he's working currently out of the University of Calgary. And so his whole pathway that he's chosen is looking at some of these byproducts of bacteria and other microbes that are there. So basically, what are they spitting out into the body, and how might that be affecting the brain? And he did this really amazing rat study that we're going to look at, looking at a substance called propionic acid. Now, propionic acid is interesting in that it comes to us from outside. You'll see in the video, it's in a lot of processed bread products. It's a preservative that's used in a lot of, especially wheat-based breads. But it's also something that's produced intrinsically in the gut by some of our gut bacteria. And it's one of the short-chain fatty acids that's produced in the gut, for any of you that are, that interested in those details.
My previous work, we were working with this compound propionic acid, and we found that for such a simple molecule, it had very widespread effects in the central nervous system, affecting brain development, metabolism, and immune function. And then, we sort of put 2 and 2 together, and we said, hey, these bacteria in the gut, when children eat carbs, ferment the carbs and make propionic acid. And in addition, some of the foods that these children craved, in addition to being high carb, did in fact contain propionic acid as a food preservative.
Propionic acid is labeled on food packaging as E280. It's a commonly used preservative in many bread, cake, and cheese products made and sold throughout Europe, Australia, South Korea, and North America.
So we thought to take propionic acid and give it in small amounts to rodents and see if the behaviors or brain changes looked anything like autism, and whether or not these behavioral and brain changes were transient.
Dr. McFabe's control subjects exhibit typical behavior. Rats are highly social animals. They greet by sniffing nose to tail and interact as they explore their surroundings. But when a propionic acid solution is introduced, this all changes.
What we noticed remarkably within 2 minutes of putting this propionic acid in, this animal immediately starts exhibiting some very peculiar behaviors. Obviously, he's hyperactive and moving very quickly, and then repetitive behaviors. Here you see an abnormal posture of walking with a hunchback. And it's an unappreciated part of autism in that patients often have toe walking, abnormal posturing, arched back. So now we'll place another animal that's been given propionic acid. And a peculiar thing happens. They show none of the normal social greetings of two rodents seeing each other.
A video tracking system records and compares the obsessive and antisocial PPA-treated rats with the normal rats. Other experiments showed responses such as rigidity and object fixation, and the intriguing fact that the effects of PPA wear off.
So now we're about a half an hour after we've exposed these two animals to propionic acids, and their behavior afterwards reverts back to normal. And it's a fat, so it's burned through metabolism. The animals become more social. Usually after their escapades, they tend to just go back to sleep. So again, we have a reversibility of hyperactivity and a reversibility of social behavior.